The morning sun crept over the horizon, brushing the dusty window panes of the small frontier cabin with streaks of gold. 18-year-old Clara May stirred beneath her patchwork quilt, a sense of anticipation tugging at her even before her eyes opened. Today was her birthday. For weeks, her mama had been too sick to do much of anything. But still, she'd whispered with a tired smile, "You'll wear that blue dress I stitched just for you, and we'll bake your favorite lemon cake." Clara had clung to those words, imagining the sweet scent of sugar and citrus filling their cabin, laughter soft and warm between them. A small celebration, just the two of them, but that had always been enough. But the moment Clara turned to the other bed and saw her mama's still form, something deep in her chest cracked. The blankets hadn't moved. Her mama's hands were folded across her chest, her eyes closed peacefully, like she had simply drifted off. But Clara knew. Somehow, she knew without touching her, without crying out. The stillness in the room wasn't sleep. It was the kind of silence that echoed, that lasted forever. Her hands trembled as she reached for her mama's arm. Cold, Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Mama?" she whispered. No response. Tears flooded her eyes as she fell to her knees beside the bed. "Mama, please wake up. Not today. Not today." She sobbed into the thin sheet, her fingers clutching the fabric, her body shaking with grief and disbelief. The silence pressed down on her like a heavy quilt. Her birthday. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She had been dreaming of cake and stories, not digging a grave. Outside, life in the town of Sagebrush Junction carried on. Clara could hear a distant wagon rumble down the trail, dogs barking at nothing, and laughter from children running toward the county fair set up near the churchyard. No one knew. No one cared. Not even the preacher. Clara sat alone in the kitchen later that morning, staring at the bowl of flour and sugar she had set out the night before. She had even laid out eggs, wrapped in a soft cloth to keep them from cracking. Everything was ready for the birthday cake she and Mama had planned to bake together. The blue dress hung from a nail on the wall. Her Mama's last gift, sewn with crooked seams and too much love. But Clara couldn't bring herself to touch any of it. The batter remained unmixed. The dress stayed where it hung. She couldn't celebrate. Not when the woman who gave her life had just left it. With no siblings and no living kin nearby, Clara knew it was up to her to do everything. To bury her mama. To feed herself. To survive. She bundled a quilt around her mama's body with shaking hands and began digging behind the house in a patch of wild grass. The sun beat down mercilessly. Her palms blistered. Her arms burned. But she didn't stop. Nobody came. She saw a few neighbors passing by in the distance, heading toward the fairgrounds with baskets of food and babies on their hips. A few glanced her way but didn't wave. Didn't slow down. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they didn't care. By afternoon, Clara had dug a hole deep enough and dragged the quilt-wrapped body of her mother into it. Her knees buckled as she lowered. The woman who had raised her into the earth. Clara didn't speak. She didn't pray. She didn't even cry anymore. She just stood there, dust on her face, hands caked in mud and sorrow, staring at the fresh mound of earth that now held everything. She loved. Her birthday. Her mother's death day. They would always be the same now. And still, no one came. As the sun began to dip behind the ridges of the distant hills, Clara sat on the porch steps, utterly alone. Her stomach grumbled, but she had no appetite. The silence buzzed in her ears. That's when she heard the sound of hooves approaching slowly along the gravel road. She didn't look up, not until the sound stopped right at the edge of her yard. Boots crunched softly on dirt. A shadow fell across the steps. Clara raised her head and blinked. There stood Rhett Carson, the quiet, broad-shouldered rancher from the far end of town. He rarely came into town unless it was for supplies. No one really knew him, and Clara had only seen him a few times, always. Nodding politely but never speaking much. In his hands, he held a lantern and a shovel. He didn't ask questions. Didn't say sorry. He just looked at her with eyes that understood. Eyes that had seen this kind of grief before. Without a word, he walked past her, toward the gravesite. Clara didn't know it then, but that single act, his quiet, gentle presence, would change everything. Because even when the world looked away, he noticed, and he cared. The last rays of sunlight were fading when Rhett Carson stepped toward the freshly dug grave behind Clara's cabin. The earth was uneven, the mound of dirt still soft and clumped. Clara followed him, her legs shaky beneath her but driven by something she couldn't name, maybe the shock, or maybe the fact that he was the first and only soul to show up. She half expected him to speak, to say the usual things people do when someone dies, "I'm sorry for your loss," or "she's in a better place." But Rhett said nothing. He simply took off his hat, bowed his head, and stood there with her. Silence between them wasn't cold like it had been all day. It was heavy, yes, but warm in a strange way. He wasn't filling the air with empty words. He was offering her something else, space to breathe. Space to feel. Clara stared down at the grave, then at her blistered palms. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. Rhett glanced at her, eyes steady. "You did right." She nodded, eyes burning again. They stood together until the stars began to scatter across the sky. Clara's dress was smeared with dirt and sweat. Rhett finally looked around and said, "You eat yet?" She shook her head. "Didn't feel right." He disappeared for a moment, returning with a cloth-wrapped bundle from his saddlebag. Inside were 2 thick slices of cornbread, a small tin of beans, and a piece of dried apple pie. Clara stared at it, hesitant. "You need to eat, Clara," he said gently, offering her a piece of cornbread. Her hands reached out, trembling. The first bite nearly broke her. Warm food in her belly felt like mercy. She hadn't realized how hollow she was, how the grief had turned her into a shell. After they ate, Rhett went back to the porch and lit the lantern he had brought. He handed it to her, "For inside, so it don't feel so dark." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, biting her lip. Then he surprised her. He walked back to the saddle and pulled something else from the leather satchel, a small, neatly wrapped package. He handed it to her without explanation. She opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver hairpin with a tiny blue stone set in the middle. Delicate, beautiful. Her breath caught. "I saw it a few weeks ago at the general store," Rhett said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't know if I should get it, but I remembered you wore blue sometimes." Clara stared at him, tears stinging her eyes. She couldn't speak. "I didn't know today was your birthday," he added, "but I figured it out." She blinked back tears. No one else did. He looked at her then, and the truth was clear in his quiet expression. He had noticed, not just today, but before. He had watched her bring firewood to town, saw how hard she worked while her mother faded, saw the loneliness she carried like a weight on her shoulders. Rhett noticed when others chose to look away. "I should go," he said softly. "But if you need anything—" She clutched the small gift to her chest. "Thank you." He tipped his hat and walked back to his horse. With one last glance, he rode off into the night, the sound of hooves fading into the dark. Clara stood on the porch a long time, the lantern flickering in her hand and the gift still warm in her palm. The wind whispered through the trees, the stars shining overhead, like candles on a cake that would never be lit. No one had come to her mother's funeral. No one had remembered her birthday. Except him. That night, Clara didn't cry herself to sleep. She laid on the bed with the lantern glowing beside her, the hairpin on the table, and the scent of cornbread still lingering in the air. For the first time in days, her heart didn't feel completely broken. She was still alone, but maybe not as alone as she thought. The morning after her mother's burial dawned gray and still. Clara sat on the porch with a mug of weak coffee in her hands, staring out at the yard. The mound of earth behind the cabin hadn't changed, but something inside her had. She had buried her mother, grieved in silence, been forgotten by the world. But one man, a quiet, reclusive rancher, had shown up when no one else did. Not with grand gestures or fancy words, but with something far more powerful, presence. Clara turned the small silver hairpin over in her hand, watching the blue stone catch the soft light. She hadn't worn it yet. She wasn't ready. But she kept it close, like a piece of calm in the storm. She hadn't expected to see Red again so soon. But just past noon, the sound of hooves stirred the silence. She glanced up, shielding her eyes from the sun. There he was, Rhett Carson, riding slow and steady up the dirt path again. This time he brought a small crate in the back of his wagon. He tied his horse and stepped down with a nod. "Brought you some supplies," he said, lifting the crate like it weighed nothing. "Beans, coffee, flour. Enough for a couple weeks." Clara stood, startled. "You didn't have to." "I know," he interrupted gently. "But I figured maybe you need someone who will." She couldn't argue. She didn't want to. She stepped aside, letting him carry the box inside the cabin. The space still smelled faintly of sickness and grief. Rhett didn't seem to mind. He placed the crate near the table and took in the quiet home. "You gonna be okay out here?" he asked, his voice low, eyes scanning the single-room cabin. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I've been managing," he gave a half-smile. "You?" "Been surviving. That's different." She looked away, cheeks hot. He changed the subject. "How long's the well pump been giving you trouble?" Clara blinked. "How'd you know?" "Saw you drawing water from the creek last week. It's too far. You'll hurt yourself trying to carry it up alone." Her heart fluttered not from his words, but from the fact that he had noticed. Again they stepped outside together, and Rhett knelt beside the old hand pump. He unscrewed the lid, tested the mechanism, and frowned. "Wood's rotted. Could patch it up, but it won't. Last, I can bring you a better seal tomorrow." Clara watched him work, the strong, steady movement of his hands. He didn't ask questions, didn't make her feel small. He just helped. And after a while, she sat down on the porch steps and told him the truth. "Took me 3 days to bury her," she said quietly. "I kept thinking someone would stop by, bring food, say something." Rhett didn't respond. He sat beside her, elbows on his knees, eyes on the horizon. "I heard the town was busy," she said bitterly. "The fair, the contests. They were laughing while I stood over a grave." Rhett finally spoke. "I was there once." Clara turned her head toward him. "My mother died on my birthday too," he said simply. "I was 19. Found her in the barn. Heart gave out. Nobody came. They all thought I'd be fine. Ranch boy, stoic." She didn't know what to say, but her chest tightened with a strange mix of sorrow and relief. He understood. Not just grief, but that grief. The kind that came on a day meant for celebration. The kind that never truly let go. "She used to sing to me every year," Clara whispered. "Even when she was sick, she tried last year." Her voice was barely there, but she hummed the melody. Rhett's voice dropped. "My ma used to bake cinnamon pie, only on birthdays." They sat in silence, bonded not by words but by wounds, after. A while he stood. "I'll fix the pump tomorrow," she nodded. "You don't have to keep coming, you know." "I know," he said again, calm and certain, "but I will." He tipped his hat and walked to his horse. Clara stood there, watching him ride away, the afternoon sun lighting the dust he left behind. She didn't fully understand what was growing between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It wasn't friendship in the way she knew it. But it was. Something strong. Something quiet and steady, like Rhett. The town hadn't come. No one had knocked. But he had returned and in the soft glow of that lonely afternoon, Clara finally felt something more than grief. She felt seen. A week had passed since her mother's burial, and though Clara's world still felt muted, she'd found a strange sort of rhythm. Grief didn't fade, exactly. It just made room for small necessities. Tending the goats, hauling water now that Rhett had patched the well, baking cornbread when the loneliness became too sharp. She still hadn't gone into town. Something about facing those familiar faces, the ones who had turned their backs when she needed them, most made her stomach knot. But the cabin held its own ghosts, and Clara knew there were pieces of her mother's life left unsorted. That's why, on a windless morning, she climbed into the loft. Her mother's cedar chest sat tucked behind old quilts and bundles of dried herbs. Clara had only peeked inside once as a child and was scolded gently for it. One day, Mama had said, "What's in there will be yours to reckon with." Now it was time. The chest creaked as she lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, scraps of lace, a small music box that no longer played, and beneath it all a sealed envelope with her name written in her mother's familiar hand. Her heart pounded as she opened it. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and I'm so sorry, baby. I wanted to be here longer. I wanted to see you grow into the woman I always knew you'd be. But the Lord doesn't always give us what we want, only what we need. And what you need now, more than anything, is the truth. I tried to protect you from this, but our land, this cabin, the field, the animals ain't free. I took out a loan a few winters back, thinking I could pay it off before you were grown. But the man I borrowed from wasn't a good man. His name is Silas Grady. He said I could pay him in small pieces. Crops, eggs, herbs. But when I fell ill, the debt kept growing. Now it's too big. He said if I didn't settle it before the summer was out, he'd take everything. He even hinted you might not be safe on your own once I was gone. I wanted to spare you from fear. But now you need to be prepared. Stand tall, Clara. Don't let him bully you like he tried to bully me. You're your father's daughter, strong and proud. Trust your instincts. And trust the people who show up when it matters. If Rhett Carson is still around, trust him. Love always." Mama Clara stared at the page, her fingers trembling. Silas Grady. Remembered him, well-slicked boots, snake oil smile. Always too friendly when he visited, offering to help out while her mother was sick. Now she saw it clearly. The kindness wasn't real. It was bait. The last time she'd seen him, he'd mentioned unfinished business and told her, with a grin that made her skin crawl, "You might need a man around to help with things now." She'd brushed it off as arrogance. Now it felt like a warning. She sat on the floor of the loft, the letter in her lap and her mother's scent still lingering faintly in the cedar. Her eyes burned not from grief, but from rage. He was planning to take the land, everything her mother had built, and Clara. Clara had no lawyer, no money, no allies, except maybe one. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the cicadas hummed, through the fields, Clara found herself riding her old mare across the pasture toward Rhett's ranch. She hadn't planned to come. She hadn't rehearsed what to say. But when she reached his fence line, there he was splitting wood near his barn, sweat on his brow, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked up the moment he heard her reins. Clara dismounted and walked toward him, letter in hand. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice tight. He wiped his hands on a cloth and nodded. "I'm listening." She handed him the letter. "Read it slowly, jaw tightening." When he finished, he looked her square in the eye. "You should have told me sooner." "I just found it," she said. "I didn't know how bad it was." He folded the letter and handed it back. Silas Grady. Doesn't play fair. And he won't stop just because you're grieving. I'm not going to let him take our land, she said, her voice cracking. I can't. You won't, Rhett said quietly. Not while I'm breathing. That night, as Clara rode back under the stars, she felt fear twisting in her belly, but also something else, steel. Her mother had trusted her to stand firm, and Clara wasn't alone anymore. She had the truth. She had the letter, and she had the quiet cowboy who had shown up again. 3 days after Clara found the letter, Silas Grady came riding up the trail like a storm brewing over a calm field. She spotted him from the kitchen window, seated atop a sleek black gelding, dressed sharp in his usual tailored vest and polished boots. His wide-brimmed hat shaded a face that always held a smile too smooth, too knowing. A man who never entered a room without expecting to own it. Clara's stomach turned. She stepped outside and stood on the porch with her arms folded, the sun behind her casting her shadow long across the dirt. She didn't greet him, didn't smile. Silas reined in his horse just short of the steps and tipped his hat with mock politeness. Well now, Miss Clara May, he said, voice oily. You sure do have your mother's fire in your eyes. Shame about her passing. I was real fond of Ruth. State your business, Clara said, voice flat. He chuckled. Always direct. I like that. Saves time. I'm here about the land. No surprise there. Silas climbed down from his horse, slow and deliberate. See, your mama and I had an agreement. When she couldn't pay in cash, I let her pay in trade eggs, herbs, some sewing. But time ran out. Debt's overdue, and I'm here to make sure. It's settled. Clara stepped down onto the dirt, her boots kicking up dust between them. You think I'm scared of you? I think you're alone, he said, eyes narrowing. And alone folk don't hold on to land for long when trouble starts knocking. She reached into her satchel and pulled out her mother's letter. I know exactly what kind of man you are, Silas, and I'm not making trades. You want this land, you'll have to take it through the law. Silas's smile faltered just for a moment. I don't recall your mother keeping detailed records, he said. I'm the only one who knows the terms. I have her written statement, she replied, signed in her own hand. He waved it off. That ain't a contract, Clara. That's a goodbye note. Won't hold up. I'll take my chances. Silas stepped closer. You think that rancher's gonna protect you? That's what this is about? She stiffened. Red has nothing to do with it, he smirked. He's a soft man, lone wolf. Doesn't get involved in town business. He won't risk a fight over someone else's dirt. Clara's jaw clenched. He already has. Silas studied her for a long moment, then his voice lowered. You got until the end of the month. You don't pay, I come back with papers, with men, and with the sheriff on my side. You mean the sheriff in your pocket, Clara snapped. He didn't deny it. Instead, he tipped his hat again with a cruel grin. Enjoy what's left of the view. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving a trail of dust and cold fury in his wake. That night, Clara rode out to Rhett's place. The stars were clouded, the sky heavy with tension like the air before a thunderstorm. Rhett was fixing a busted gate when she arrived. The moment he saw her face, he dropped the hammer. He came, Rhett said. She nodded. Gave me a deadline, end of the month. Rhett cursed under his breath and motioned her inside. They sat at the kitchen table playing wood, oil lamp flickering between them. I want to fight him, Clara said. But I don't know how. You don't have to do it alone, Rhett replied. I meant what I said. She looked down at her hands, fingers fidgeting. He's got the sheriff. Half the town owes him. Everyone's scared of him. I'm not. She looked up. You've got her letter, he continued. That's something. But we'll need more. Proof of his Threats. Witnesses, if we can find any. And there's something else I've been thinking about. What? My land. It borders yours. If we combine our filings, we might stand a chance at freezing any seizure, but it means putting my name on it. Co-signing. Clara stared at him. That's serious, I know. His voice was low. I'm not asking for anything in return. This isn't charity. It's respect. And maybe something more. She swallowed hard, emotions rising. You'd really put your name on the line for me. He leaned back in his chair. Clara, you're the strongest person I've ever met, but strong folks still need someone in their corner. For the first time that day, Clara let herself breathe. The fight wasn't over. But now, she had someone beside her who wasn't just willing to help. He was ready to stand. The next morning dawned with a chill in the air, the kind that hinted at the end of summer and the beginning of something. Uncertain. Clara stood in the yard behind Rhett's barn, adjusting the reins of an old saddle as Rhett watched her from across the fence. The horses whinnied softly in the pasture behind them, sensing the tension and purpose in the air. Been a while. Since you rode for real, huh? Rhett asked, tossing her a worn pair of gloves. Clara caught them and gave a dry smile. Not since Mama got sick. I didn't have the time or reason. Well, he said, stepping beside her, you've got both now. She looked up at the gelding he'd offered her to ride mid-sized. Brown with a streak of white on his chest, gentle eyes but powerful legs. What's his name? Whiskey, Rhett said. He's stubborn but loyal. Thought he suited. You. Clara laughed under her breath and climbed into the saddle. She wobbled at first, her balance off, muscles unpracticed. Rhett walked beside her as she guided the horse toward the trail behind the ranch, trees arching overhead like guardians. They said little at first, just the sounds of hooves on dirt and the wind through the brush. I need you confident on horseback, Rhett said eventually. If things with Silas go sideways, you need to ride fast, think sharp, and not panic. She nodded. That why you brought me out here? That, and you look like you've been carrying the world on your back. Sometimes the trail helps with that. It did. They rode for hours through golden grass and the smell of pine, stopping near a quiet stream where the land dipped low and flowers still bloomed despite the drought. Clara climbed down, boots landing in soft dirt, and knelt at the water's edge. It's beautiful, she whispered. Rhett tied the horses and joined her. My ma used to say God hid peace in places people forget to look. She smiled softly. I think your ma and mine would have been friends. They both raised stubborn kids, maybe. They sat on a smooth rock by the stream, boots muddy, shoulders brushing lightly. Clara broke the silence. I'm scared. Rhett, he looked at her. Silas is powerful. I've lived my whole life watching folks bend around him like he's the wind. What if I can't fight that? Rhett didn't rush to answer. Instead, he picked up a small flat stone and skipped it across the stream, 3 clean jumps before it sank. You ever seen a pine tree after a fire? He asked. She frowned. Sure, scorched, blackened. Yeah, he said. But give it time, and you'll see green poking out of the ash. Stronger than before. Nature fights back. You will too. She looked at him, really looked. The quiet man who had shown. Up with a shovel when no one else had. Who brought her food, patched her well, gave her a lantern, and never once asked for anything in return. You don't even know me, she said. I know enough. You know I've lost everything. No, you haven't, he said firmly. You lost your mother. You lost the people you thought you could count on. But you didn't lose yourself, and you didn't lose your land yet. We've still got fight in us. She swallowed the lump in her throat. I never had someone believe in me like that before. Rhett turned to her. Then it's about damn time. The ride back was slower. Clara held herself straighter in the saddle. Her hands were more confident, her back a little more relaxed. At the cabin, Rhett dismounted and helped her down. Their hands lingered. "You're getting stronger," he said. She looked up at him. "So are we." He didn't speak, but the way he looked at her said everything. Before he left, he handed her a bundle of legal papers he'd drawn up, documents tying their lands together temporarily under joint ownership, giving her legal standing to challenge any claim Silas might make. "It's your name on the deed," she said, voice low. "And yours," he replied, side by side. That night, Clara stood in front of her mother's grave in the moonlight, the stars glimmering like quiet blessings overhead. "I'm learning to fight, Mama," she whispered, "and I'm not alone anymore." She slipped the silver hairpin into her braid for the first time. Then she walked back into the cabin, not broken, not just surviving, but beginning to rise. Tomorrow she'd ride again, this time to face the tea. The town of Sagebrush Junction had never exactly welcomed Clara with open arms, but after her mother died, it became colder than ever. At first, the silence had been passive. No condolences, no casseroles, no knocks on the door. But now that Clara was refusing to sell the land to Silas Grady, now that she was showing up in town beside Rhett Carson, the whispers started, and they weren't quiet. She felt the eyes first sharp, judging, lingering too long as she walked into the general store. Clara kept her head high, a list clutched in her hand, but the murmurs followed her like shadows. "She's wearing that man's clothes now? Did you hear she's got his name on her deed? Lord, her mother ain't been dead a month and she's already hanging off his arm." Mrs. Hathaway, the shopkeeper's wife, narrowed her eyes from behind the counter. "I see you found yourself some help," she said pointedly. Eyeing Rhett, who waited outside by the horses. Clara remained calm. "I came for flour and kerosene. Nothing else." The woman scoffed and rang her up. "I'd be careful who you lean on, Miss Clara. Men like that, they help you just long enough to own you." Clara clenched her teeth. "Rhett doesn't own anything that isn't offered freely." Mrs. Hathaway handed her the parcel without another word, but her eyes said plenty. Outside, Clara passed the supplies to Rhett, who placed them in the saddlebag. He noticed the tightness in her jaw. "They said something, didn't they?" She shook her head. "Nothing worth repeating." He looked at her gently. "You don't have to go through this in public, Clara. You can send me to town instead." "No." She took a breath. "I'm not hiding. If I give in to their gossip, I'm just proving them right." Still, the tension lingered. In a small town, reputation stuck like dust, and Clara was now branded a troublemaker. Or worse, a girl using her grief to land a rancher. Even the church had gone quiet. Pastor Alden, once warm and friendly, when her mother was ill, now barely nodded in her direction. He'd always had ties to Silas. Clara wondered if the Sunday sermons would start, carrying not-so-subtle warnings about prideful girls and their sins. Back at the cabin, Rhett helped her unload the goods. "You ever think about just selling?" he asked softly, though he clearly hated the question. Clara didn't get angry. She understood it. "All the time," she admitted. "It'd be easier. I could take the money, go somewhere new, start fresh. But—" she looked out toward the grave. "If I walk away now, I'm saying Mama's life and everything she fought for wasn't worth standing up for. That her silence meant nothing, and that he wins." Rhett stepped closer. "Then we hold the line," she nodded. "We do." The next morning, Silas made his move. Clara opened the door to find a paper nailed to her post. A notice of intent to seize, citing unpaid debt, disputed land rights, and a scheduled hearing before the county land judge in 10 days. It was a bluff. Rhett had said as much. Silas had no real claim, but he had money and influence. That could turn fiction into fact fast in a town like this. She brought the paper to Rhett. They're pushing hard, he said, scanning the language. He's counting on me breaking before the hearing. We won't, Clara hesitated. I can't lose this place. But the people here, they're turning on me. Rhett's voice dropped. Then let them. She looked up. They turned cold because you chose to fight. Clara, you put a mirror up to this town and they don't like what they see. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It means they're afraid. She exhaled slowly. It still hurts. I know. Rhett paused, then added, let them talk. Let them sneer. We're not here to win their approval. We're here to protect what matters. Clara touched the letter from her mother, now folded and worn from so much rereading. I wish she could see this, that I didn't run. She does, Rhett said. And I do? Clara didn't sleep much the night before her 19th birthday. Her cabin felt too quiet, too tense, like the walls were holding their breath. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters and whispered threats through the tall grass. Every creak, every groan in the floorboards reminded her of Silas's warning and the town's cold shoulders. Her birthday had once meant lemon cake, humming songs, her mother's hands braiding her hair. Now it meant court dates and whispered judgment, grief and fear, but also. Just before dawn, Clara heard a gentle knock on the door. She opened it with a candle still in hand. There he was, standing with a soft grin, a wool blanket slung over his shoulder and 2 horses already saddled behind him. Come on, Rhett said, before the sun catches us. She blinked, confused. Where are we going? You'll see. Wear a coat, it's chilly up high. Despite everything, court notices, town gossip, land threats, Clara found herself smiling. She threw on her riding jacket, pinned back her hair, and followed him. Into the cool dark, mounting whiskey like she'd been doing it all her life. They rode west first, then cut north, up toward the hills where the pines grew thicker and the grass shimmered silver in the moonlight. No one else was out, just the 2 of them, galloping toward somewhere unknown but safe. Eventually they reached a small ridge above a clearing bathed in moonlight. A stream trickled through it and wildflowers bloomed in every color: blue, violet, white. Clara gasped softly. I come here when the world gets too loud, Rhett said, dismounting and spreading out the blanket. Clara slid off Whiskey's back, still taking in the quiet beauty. It's like something out of a dream. Rhett handed her a small parcel wrapped in cloth. Happy birthday. Her throat tightened. You remembered. Course I did. Inside the bundle was a leather-bound journal, hand-stitched and embossed with her initials. The pages smelled of ink and cedar. I figured, you've been carrying a lot. Maybe putting some of it on paper might help. Clara blinked back tears. I haven't had a birthday gift since Mama passed. Well, he said, I plan to change that. They sat on the blanket, sipping hot coffee from a thermos Rhett had packed, watching the sky shift from navy to gold. As the first rays of sun rose over the hills, Clara felt something break loose in her chest, not grief, not fear, but the first flutter of something brighter. You ever think of leaving? She asked softly. Rhett stared at the horizon. All the time when I was younger. But this land, it roots you, even when you think you want to escape. My folks died here. My blood's in this soil. So's yours now. Clara looked down. I used to dream of cities. Streetlights, music, people who didn't know my name. But then I think, maybe this place doesn't need to be perfect. Maybe it just needs to be mine. He nodded slowly. You can't run from pain, but you can grow around it. You're already doing that. She turned to him. You think we'll win? He met her gaze. We will. Not you. We dot as the sun climbed higher. Rhett led her up the last stretch of the ridge. At the top, Clara gasped. Below, their 2 properties stretched into the valley. Side by side, her late mother's land and Rhett's adjoining fields, golden and green like 2 halves of something whole. Look, he said. I didn't bring you here just for peace and coffee." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I've had my lawyer file a motion to combine the parcels for tax and ownership purposes, temporarily, unless you say otherwise." Her heart raced. "You mean? If the court tries to seize your land, they'll have to take mine too. And I'm not so easy to bully. Rhett?" She breathed. "I know what this means," he said, his voice steady. "It's not a proposal, not yet, but it's a promise that you don't have to face this fight alone, not ever again." Clara took the paper in trembling hands. "Why me? Why do you care so much?" He gave her a smile that could have cracked the coldest frost. "Because you were the only one who didn't ask for help but deserved it most. Because I see you, Clara. I always have." She swallowed, eyes wet. "Then you should know I'm scared, but I'm ready." He took her hand. "Good," he whispered, "because the fight starts tomorrow." And as they stood on that ridge, hand in hand, the sun lighting up their land below, Clara realized this wasn't just a birthday ride, Dot. It was the beginning of belonging to a place, to a memory, and maybe to someone. The courthouse in Sagebrush Junction wasn't much, just a weather-worn wooden building near the town square, with faded red paint and a crooked sign that read County Hall. But to Clara, it felt as intimidating as a cathedral. She stood outside, it now in her cleanest dress navy blue with white stitching and the silver hairpin gleaming in her braid. Beside her, Rhett stood tall and calm, hat in one hand, papers in the other. His quiet presence had become her shield these past few weeks, his support more reliable than even her own courage. "You ready?" he asked gently. Clara took a shaky breath. "No, but I'm walking in anyway." Inside, the room buzzed with tension. Silas Grady sat confidently at a polished desk near the front, surrounded by two of his hired men and a well-dressed lawyer who looked far too smug. His boots were up on the chair rail behind him, like the place already belonged to him. The county judge, an older man named Judge Beckwith, adjusted his glasses and nodded toward Clara. "Miss Clara May Whitlock and Mr. Rhett Carson, step forward." Clara felt every eye in the room turn toward her as she walked to the front with Rhett. She felt their doubt, their disapproval. Most of them weren't here to support her. They were here to see a fight. Judge Beckwith cleared his throat. "We're here today to address the petition of land seizure filed by Mr. Silas Grady regarding a long-standing debt owed by the late Ruth Whitlock." Silas's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the debt was substantial and unpaid." Mr. Grady allowed Ruth Whitlock time and grace beyond the terms of the original loan. "Now that she has passed, we seek lawful ownership of the property." Judge Beckwith turned to Clara. "Miss Whitlock, how do you respond?" Clara took out her mother's letter, hands shaking. "This is a written statement from my mother detailing the nature of the debt and the coercion used by Mr. Grady when she was ill. It also makes clear he intended to pressure me after her death. I believe this debt was predatory and without a formal contract. I also have witness testimony." She looked at Rhett. He nodded and stepped forward, submitting the joint deed agreement between their two properties, along with a signed affidavit from his attorney. Rhett's voice rang steady. "Your Honor, Miss Whitlock's land is now legally merged with mine. Under state code, a forced seizure must consider the full ownership agreement. Mr. Grady has no jurisdiction over my land and certainly not over both." Murmurs rippled through the room. Silas's lawyer snapped, "This is a delay tactic." "Judge." Beckwith raised his hand. "I'll be the one to decide that." He read through the documents, adjusting his glasses. "I see legal merit here, and no formal loan contract on record. Just vague references. Mr. Grady, did you, at any point, record or notarize your arrangement with the deceased?" Silas stood, jaw tight. It was a private agreement. She knew what she owed. Yet there is no written signed proof of that. Debt? No, sir. Judge Beckwith raised a brow. And no mention of collateral? No witnesses? Silas looked rattled now. The whole town knew she owed me. But the law doesn't rely on gossip, Mr. Grady. The courtroom held its breath. Clara stared straight ahead. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Judge Beckwith finally spoke. I see no legal basis for the seizure of Miss Whitlock's land. Furthermore, the joining of the two properties through a lawful co-filing adds weight to her claim. Petition denied. Gasps filled the room. Silas's face darkened. This isn't over, he growled. Clara met his eyes for the first time that day. Yes, it is. Outside the courthouse, Clara felt the weight begin to lift from her shoulders. The townsfolk didn't say much. Some nodded respectfully, others turned away, but no one whispered any more. She hadn't just survived, she had won. Rhett turned to her. You did good. No, she said, smiling. We did good. He paused, then reached into his vest pocket. One more thing. She raised an eyebrow. Another document? No, he said, holding out a small velvet pouch. Something older than paper. Inside was a silver locket, oval-shaped, simple. Inside it, her mother's photograph. I found it at an auction last year, he said. Didn't know why I bought it, until now. Clara clutched it to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from finally feeling whole again. She'd kept her mother's land. She'd kept her dignity. And she had someone who had stood beside her when no one else dared. There was still healing to do. But for the first time in a long time, Clara didn't feel like a girl fighting alone. She felt like a woman who had won something sacred. The morning after the hearing, the valley was quiet again. No threats, no letters nailed to her fence, no whispers behind her back. Just the sound of wind rustling through the fields and the slow hum of life returning to a land that had nearly been lost. Clara stepped outside barefoot, the cool dirt grounding her. She held the silver locket Red had given her close to her chest, the tiny photo of her mother nestled safely inside. She hadn't taken it off since the moment he placed it in her hand. Everything had changed. And yet, so much remained. The cabin still leaned slightly to the left. The goats still bleated impatiently in the morning. The garden still needed weeding, and the roof still had a leak near the back corner. But it was hers. Every flaw, every crack, every inch of soil her mother had tended by hand, it was still standing, because she had fought for it, because they had fought for it. Rhett showed up around mid-morning, as he often did these days, without ceremony or expectation. He carried fence wire and a jar of plum preserves from the ranch cook. Clara smiled at the sight of both. I thought you could use something sweet, he said, handing her the jar. She took it with a grateful nod. And the wire? I figured we could fix that busted stretch near the pasture. Together. Always together, she said quietly. They worked side by side for most of the day, sweating, laughing, letting silence fall when it wanted to. With Silas gone and the town's fire cooled, Clara could breathe again. While Red hammered the last nail into the fence post, Clara leaned on the wood and looked across the valley. Their two lands, now joined by law and by heart, rolled out before them like a painting, golden fields meeting green hills, kissed by sunlight and quiet strength. I thought about leaving, she said suddenly, after Mama passed, before the hearing. Just packing up and disappearing. Rhett didn't stop working, but he listened closely. Why didn't you? She turned toward him. Because you showed up. He paused, then met her gaze. You were always worth showing up for. They stood like that for a moment, the wind playing with the strands of her braid, the silver hairpin glinting under the sun. Then Rhett cleared his throat. There's something I want to ask you. She raised an eyebrow. This about more fence work? No, he said, suddenly serious. It's about staying, for good. He pulled a small box from his coat pocket. Her breath caught. Inside was a gold band, simple and unadorned. Save for a tiny engraving inside, "Strength is quiet." "I know this ain't the fanciest proposal," he said, voice low. "But it's honest, like you. I don't need a wedding tomorrow or a white dress. I just want you beside me. Not because you need me, but because you want me there." Clara swallowed hard, heart-pounding. "Rhett Carson, you stood beside me when no one else did. You helped me fight for what mattered, and you never once asked for anything in return." He looked down. "So, is that a no?" She laughed, teary-eyed. "That's a yes, you fool." That night, they sat on the porch of her cabin, their cabin now watching the stars come out one by one. Clara rested her head on Rhett's shoulder. The smell of the earth and the slow sounds of summer all around them. "I used to think my birthday was cursed," she said. He tilted his head. "What changed?" "You did," she whispered. "You made it mean something again." He kissed her forehead gently. "It always meant something, Clara. You just needed someone to remind." "You." She looked out at the land, the land her mother had loved and protected until the very end. Now it would stay in the family. And one day maybe she and Rhett would raise a family of their own here, a home that had nearly been lost, now stronger than ever. Epilogue years later, Clara would tell her children about that time, how her birthday became a funeral, and how one man's kindness changed the course of her life. She'd tell them how sometimes the strongest people are the ones who don't make noise, how love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures, but in quiet hands fixing a broken well, in warm cornbread, in standing beside someone when the rest of the world turns away. And how sometimes the land you fight for becomes the place where your heart finally rests, because on the day Clara lost everything, Rhett was the only one who cared, and that was enough to rebuild everything.